And by the time Jesus comes, they had been living for at least 600 years in abject occupation, with the remnants of destruction around them, and they longed for the good old days that none of them had lived in, but they'd all heard about because the stories had been passed down. And so they thought, surely we'll get a king, and the king will come and restore the army, and the army will whoop up on those Romans, who were their current occupiers, restore the kingdom, and everything will be fine. And lest you think that that is a vision of what the Messiah ought to be, that is bound in time to that unique situation, there are still Christians today who wait for Jesus, or more accurately his followers, to go wipe out the dome and the rock which sits on top of the Temple Mount, restore the temple, and signal in the dawn of a new age. And somewhere in their minds they expect the Muslim people to go, oh, go ahead. Destroy one of our 3 most holy places. That's fine. We understand it's in your book. Just go do what you have to do. They feel that way despite the fact that when Jesus came, he said repeatedly, in many different ways, my kingdom is not of this world. Despite that, if the fact that Jesus came and they kept trying to cast him in a light that fit their religious expectations, which were, you got to follow the rules. And yet Jesus talked more about a spirit than a rule. Still today, 2,000 years later, we have Christians who want to put us back into that light of where we have to follow rules. And if we just keep the rules perfectly, everything will be okay. Never mind that Jesus was the fulfillment of all that. And I could stand here and say, that's really dumb. And I would be right, but I'm not going to say that because it's a dumbness that's inherent in us. We have our certain expectations of how things are. And it's much easier for us to understand how things are than to imagine how they might be. We know how the world operates as it is. How it might operate if it was a loving and peace-filled place, that's a little scary. Because as the old saying goes, the devil you know is better than the angel you don't. Jesus came to, among other things, talk to us about our expectations and allow us to let go of them. Allow ourselves, rather, to let go of them. To say, well, maybe it doesn't work this way. Maybe we can reimagine how the world ought to be. Maybe we can say, instead of competition, we might try to begin to cooperate. Maybe we can say, instead of getting ahead at any cost, we might change our vision and say that we need to help those less fortunate than us. Now, of course, as we re-envision things and reimagine things, sometimes we get really bad ideas. And that's okay. 10 years ago, I celebrated my first Christmas Eve liturgy. And I was at this church that explained to me that they had an Advent procession, an Advent wreath procession. And what it involved was 9 adult human beings. And they had garland, fake garland. I mean, not fake, but you know, plastic. They're not the real garlands, but the green stuff, the roping. And they formed a box, you know, 3 rows of 3 across, and in the center, somebody held their version of the Paschal candle. They held the candle that was to be the light of Christ, and it wasn't lit. And they'd start at the back in this box, and O Come, Emmanuel would play. And every time it got to that point where it went, rejoice, rejoice, all the people with the garlands, or the roping, lifted them over their head and went like this. And then they lowered them down, and they slowly took off down the aisle until the next time it went, rejoice, rejoice. And that was repeated. And somewhere there's a picture of my face when I first saw this. Because I hadn't seen any kind of rehearsal. And I had a look that was just, it's hard to put into words. But when they got to the front, I was supposed to light this candle, and I was standing at the altar, like I was told. And the problem was, the candle was surrounded by these 8 people with this box of roping, and I couldn't get to the candle. Didn't have a flamethrower. The candle was like from where I am now in the second row, for crying out loud. There was just no way I could get there. And it occurred to me as I was preparing for tonight that that's an interesting metaphor for what happens a lot of times when we try and reimagine something. We make it so darn complicated that we can't get to the point. We set it up with so many preliminaries that we never get past the preliminaries to get past the moment of truth. But Christmas night says, forget about the preliminaries. The point is here now. Jesus isn't what we expected. And contrary to what our culture tends to do, we say, well, Jesus was born in terrible, terrible poverty. No, Jesus was born in terrible, terrible ordinariness. For that time in that part of the world, and in fact, for most of the world in our time today. Most of the people in the world are not born in hospitals attended by doctors. They're born in the fields. They're born in the jungles. They're born in the mountains. And their family handles it. He came in an ordinary way. He came in a very ordinary place. And he came basically to say to the people to whom he came, throw away your dreams about how you think it ought to be, and recognize the world as it is. Tear off all those layers of crud that have been accumulated over the years, and see that the truth is here right now, right in front of you, and it's both as easy and as hard as loving everybody you encounter. And something about our human instinct says, oh, but we have to pile stuff on there. We better surround the truth with 8 people with garlands so that it's harder to get at. Or we better surround the truth with rules, like having to wear certain clothing or worship on a certain day or a certain time or behave this way, and if you don't follow the rules, you can't come in. If you're not wearing the right clothes, you stay at the door. If you don't love the right people, you stay at the door. If you don't look the right way, you stay at the door. If you're not as ugly as we are, you stay at the door. Except what we say is, if you're not as good looking as we are. There's a certain ugliness in that whole behavior. And Jesus kept saying, I come in the everyday to show you that it's not what you think it is in the everyday. So in the same way that music takes us away from some of that complex thinking we do and occupies part of our mind to let the truth come through, I'd like to suggest that for the coming year, the truth about our spiritual lives may be to set aside all the complicated things. Leave them for next year. But for 2010, think about Jesus and your spiritual life in the most basic, simplest way you can. Whether you do that by concentrating on a single candle with the flame flickering, or dozens of them, but maybe just the one is better. Whether you do it while you listen to a piece of sacred music that you like, and look at that candle. And then ask yourself the all-important question. The question that takes you from thinking about it to living it. What might I do to reach out in kindness to one person today? In the simplest way possible. And as you fall into repeating that need for complexity falls away. The truth of keep it simple, stupid comes to the front. We want to make it complicated, and it isn't. It's all about love. It's all about how would we want someone to treat us. And everything else that's been piled on top of it just doesn't matter. Let that fade away with the passing of this night and awaken into a reality of love and openness and simplicity. And if other people want to argue about all the other stuff, let them. We don't need to get entangled in that. Let them go. And when they get tired of it, they'll be